Welcome to Data Security Over Coffee. That's DSOC to those in the know.
Where the only thing more dangerous than a zero-day exploit is Chad from accounting clicking on every single email attachment.
From password post-its hidden under keyboards
to that one guy who keeps using password 123 despite our 47 security memos. We're here to talk about the threats you never knew you should be terrified of.
I'm Dr. Joe Harford.
And I'm Angie. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Singer Keating.
Bringing you the latest in cybersecurity nightmares and risk management drama.
Because somewhere out there, a hacker's trying to get into your company's data.
And Karen from HR just clicked on another free iPhone pop-up. This is Data Security Over Coffee, DSOC, where every episode is a penetration test you didn't ask for.
Oh my gosh, July 28th. The summer is flying by. It really is. Terry, I want to say that you did not disappoint because you are like everybody else. When my sister rolls into, did you turn it on again and off again? You had that little smile on your face because you know that's what we tell people to do and they don't know what the hell they're doing with technology. So,
that's the ID10T error, is that, if I recall, right?
Say again?
That's the ID10T error, right?
Don't be careful. Don't age yourself. Be careful now, because you are probably the youngest on this phone call. So, coming live from Chicago, Terry, thanks so much for being with us, our friend from HALOCK.
Pleasure to be here at Data Security and Coffee, Joe and Angie.
You did well with the cue card. I like that. Very well done. Very well done. So easy introduction. Who are you?
Yeah.
Where do you work? What do you do? And we're going to add something else since we can't see a really cool background. What do you do for fun that's cool that people are going to want to know more about?
Well, all right. We'll try. So thank you. I'm Terry Kurzynski, founder and senior partner at HALOCK Security Labs. We are going to have our 30th anniversary this October 15th. So it's been 30 years.
Ooh, nice.
I've been told that, a company that's lasted 30 years is, one in whatever a million or so. So feel fortunate. I'm the chief security advisor for HALOCK Security Labs. And as far as what I do outside of work, is that the other part of this question?
Yeah.
Got a couple passions. Music's one of them. So I started out as a drummer, but switched over, added guitar and did an open mic last week and stuff like that. So I'm actually starting to, get more courage going on that side. But always been a skier, was a ski instructor, racer back in the day. Probably will retire as a ski instructor someday. And avid kite surfer as well. So I'll be doing that hopefully this weekend as I'm taking off 4 days.
I did not know. A kite surfer.
Yeah.
Whoa. You are just like the coolest ever.
I don't know about that, but I have
your life on the line. You're a risk.
It's all about risk, risk reward, right?
See that?
So,
well, we appreciate you being here. Big shout out to the BDO Alliance for bringing us together as fellow BRNs. So I'm appreciative. A big shout to Steph Luke, who made the introduction back in the day. So that was very cool. Appreciate that. So when we met for the first time, and then Angie and I actually came out to Chicago and met with you and the team.
Yeah.
I will not speak for Angie. I will only speak for myself. You introduced something to me that I was not familiar with, and that was the idea of this thing called duty of care. And we talked a lot about risk assessments. We talked a lot about the maturity of risk assessments over time and what do they mean. And you had a really incredible story that I think other people would like to hear more about. And so have at it.
Yeah, if I recall, so the concept of duty of care has been around for a long time. In product negligence, the concept of the calculus of negligence and duty of care goes back to 1947 in this country with the hand rules they call judge learned hand and the calculus of negligence, and that played its way into our product negligence ever since then. And it just the three principles of the calculus of negligence, and I'll bring it back to cybersecurity real quick here, but is that bad thing that happened, was it foreseeable? Was it foreseeable that bad thing would happen? What was the gravity of the injuries? Was it an inconvenience, or was it, death, and, somewhere in between? And then what would have been the burden to you, the person who caused this bad thing to happen? What would have been the burden to reduce either the impact or the probability of it happening, or some combination of both? What would have been that burden? In other words, the burden should not far exceed the weighted impact that you're trying to protect against. It wouldn't be reasonable. And so I'll tie this all together. And that's just the backdrop. But in cybersecurity, I didn't know any of that, by the way, as a cybersecurity professional, as I entered into the cybersecurity back in the 90s. But back when the Target case happened, I was asked by one of my colleagues, friends, who was litigating the case on behalf of one of the injured banks from the Target case to be a subject matter expert, a cybersecurity expert, right? And what we learned on that particular case coming out of, and this is now 2013 and 2014, was that as an industry, cybersecurity professionals, we were not performing risk assessments correctly because they would not hold up in front of a judge or a regulator correctly, because believe it or not, judges don't know the difference between this encryption scheme and that SIM and that firewall and that WAF. Don't know any of that. They're going to ask the question, that thing that happened, was it foreseeable? What did you do to reduce the risk down to an acceptable level to all parties? And this is kind of like, to people that are attorneys, they understand this.
Okay.
But for cybersecurity professionals who've been practicing this and helping organizations do risk assessments, we were like, what? What are you talking about? And this is really important because all the risk assessments up to that point, if you look at all of them, they were basically, what's the impact to me? Me. What's the impact in dollars next year to me? But if you're in front of a judge, what he wants to know is, did you consider the potential impact to all potential claimants, anyone, not just the organization itself, but those outside the organization? They might not even be clients. They're just people that would be miscellaneously injured or impacted because of how you're operating. So we had to rethink how risk assessments need to be performed. And if you think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability and how traditional scoring was done, it's like, what's the impact on this asset on confidentiality, integrity, and availability? And you would score it and you give that over to whoever is interested in looking at it. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the story, because they can't make much of that. They're like, well, I don't know what this means. Are we okay? Are we in trouble? Do we need to do something? Are we going to be able to operate? They don't know those other pieces. So we end up creating the duty of care risk standard, DoCRA.org, to really rescore risk based on mission, objectives, and obligations, the very things that both the business wants to see and what the legal system wants to see in order to make sure you're performing your duty of care. And as it happened in 2017, we started writing the risk method for the Center for Internet Security based on that DoCRA standard. So not only is there a standard out there on DoCRA.org, but there's now a risk method based, it's now in version 2.2. There's 3 tiers with the Center for Internet Security. So it's called the CIS-RAM. And that methodology gives you the step-by-step on how to implement this duty of care risk standard. It's now had over 200,000 downloads over the last 8 years as it's been live. And we're actually going to be doing a webinar with CIS in September to once again go over that process. So that's a lot of background, but this thing has really made its way into the legal mind. So the people that really resonates with at corporations are the attorneys responsible for making sure the organization's performing its duty of care. And especially if they're publicly traded, they now have that obligation under the 10K1C to talk about how they're the organization, now executives are making informed decisions about cybersecurity. Do they have any material impacts? All that. Deciding that has to be based on some sort of risk and governance program that's rooted in duty of care. And that's where we're getting a lot of attraction with organizations, is through their legal and compliance arms, because they get it.
So, Terry, one of the industries that we work with very heavily is healthcare, regulated under the HIPAA security rule.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about the impact DoCRA has had as it relates to working with OCR auditors or post-breach, post-security incident investigations, and then remediation required by OCR following a security incident?
Right. So while HIPAA was written by the Department of Health and Human Services, it's enforced by the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, and they'll do their audits, right? What we found is whether on the heels of a breach or maybe a whistleblower action, we will get very urgent calls from attorneys that are representing those healthcare organizations saying that we need to perform an urgent DoCRA-based risk assessment because OCR is coming in, or maybe there's a class action coming from a multi-district class action from a group of AGs from around the country. And they want to get ahead of it. And why that is because if you go back 5-10 years, the regulators and the attorneys, when they litigate these cases, they would often throw in the kitchen sink on the consent orders. We need you to do all this stuff. A lot of it not reasonable. So if the organization can get ahead of it, even in the face of a scrutiny from a regulator or a breach, if they can get ahead of it and say, we did this DoCRA-based risk assessment, here's our prioritized risk of impacts to us and to others. And this is our definition of reasonable, which is another key thing to duty of care risk standards, that we have to define what acceptable risk is. I challenge anyone listening to this right now, and for you, Angie and Joe, to ask your clients, what's your definition of acceptable risk? How do you know when you've done enough? And know what they usually say? Well, we sit around and we usually say, are we going to remediate until we feel that we've spent enough money? Like enough, so that we can justify saying we did enough. But that's not going to actually fly if there's ever an incident or you're under scrutiny. It's going to be this balance test on what would have been the burden to remediate that risk versus the impacts that you're causing, the weighted impacts to all. So I challenge everyone to say, do you have a definition of acceptable risk? And how do you know you're applying reasonable controls through that definition to bring the risk down to an acceptable level, not just to you, but to others? So going back to your question, we have had healthcare organizations running DoCRA, duty of care-based risk assessments. They have an incident, not many, but they have had incidents. And claims have been made against those organizations. And when they supply the one piece of discovery that every AG and OCR or regulator is going to ask for is the risk register. Now, why do they do that? It tells the risk conscience of the organization. Did they consider the harm to all the potential claimants, or at least this group of people that are taking up a claim? Did they consider it? So it says, and if they didn't even have a risk assessment, you just start negotiating right there, because you have a position of weakness if you don't even have a risk register. But by looking at that risk register, they can tell, were they reasonable organization or were they negligent? That's it. And one of the few times that I know we've had an organization running duty of care that had an incident in one particular state, the AG asked for discovery and dropped the case after they saw it met this bar of reasonable. They didn't even pursue it because they're like, well, what are we going to do? We can't prove their negligence, so we can't get our pound of flesh out of it. It's not worth pursuing. They pursue the ones that are obvious negligent. That's it. So, yeah, we've had both experience after the breach and post-breach, with healthcare organizations. And I'll tell you, the ones that have not had those in place, like a DoCRA-based risk assessment, you'll see the fines coming from OCR. So we've also seen this, and this is kind of a new thing. after the breach, the AGs now know enough about duty of care risk and the standards to say, you know what, we're not going to fine you, but we will in a year if you haven't implemented a DoCRA-based risk assessment and risk management program. You need to run it this way, and we won't fine you. But if we come back in a year and you haven't done it, then the fines are going to stick. So we've also seen that angle. That's a new one that just started happening last year. So kind of fun.
Yeah.
How do you see the way that risk assessments are done today changing for an organization, changing for the service provider that helps to facilitate that activity, and the investment that the organization has to make?
It's there's a lot packed in there, you know, we're moving through that right now with AI automating lots of things. Everyone's figuring out, okay, so we've taken the entire risk assessment process. We've broken it down to its bare minimum parts, and we said, what's taking time and what can we speed up through AI? And one of those clearly is evidence collection, analysis, reporting, and then the prioritized risk register, picking solutions. There's checkpoints on that and evidence that our team has to review. But we're right now piloting, you know, all that, taking our risk assessments, which might take normally 3-4 months, and trying to get those down into just a couple weeks, you know, to be more efficient. So that evidence collection is always the big one. The analysis of all that, you know, the information you get in on the evidence, how you prioritize it, how you get a risk register, how you get the risk treatment plan and the roadmap together. Those are all big chunky pieces that AI is really helping us streamline that. Now, that's not our default. We're still kind of running these in parallel, but we see that by next year that's really going to be the standard going forward.
And Terry, is there kind of a typical client profile of who, obviously everyone should be doing this, but we realize that smaller organizations are resource constrained and so forth. But when you look at an organization and you're looking for that kind of perfect HALOCK client, or you know, client that really is going to get tangible benefit from having a DoCRA-based risk analysis.
Sure.
What does that client look like in terms of demographic, size, revenue, industry? Like, paint me a picture of that client.
Yeah, for me, it's probably more of the drivers than it is the size. So let's start with the fact that anyone that needs to do a risk assessment, why would you not do it based on duty of care risk? So I'll just start there. Like, why would you want to put yourself in jeopardy by not doing it based on DoCRA? Because if you go to CIS-RAM, there's 3 different versions: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. It's all free. People can download it. So why wouldn't you base it on duty of care? So I'll start there. So if you have to do a risk assessment, it should be based on duty of care risk. And you can, even if you want to take the NIST 800-53 controls, NIST CSF, whatever, ISO 27001, ISO 42001, all that's fine. But it's the methodology and how you prioritize risk that you can lift from the CIS-RAM to make sure it's based on impacts to mission, objectives, and obligations.
But for instance, let me stop you there. For instance, you know, one of the things that we see when we don't stick to our TCP is, let's say we're talking about healthcare.
Yeah.
We will see the family practice group with 10 doctors, a bunch of practitioners, and their definition of a risk analysis is basically a gap assessment on an Excel spreadsheet that they give to a nurse who happens to know something about IT, or they give to the IT guy and say, you know, check these boxes. Okay, we've done our risk analysis. We all as professionals know that's not even remotely a risk analysis. But the fact of the matter is there's not enough education on the planet that's going to change their minds until they are on that OCR wall of shame. And so what is it, you know, what are those factors when you are up against that mindset in those types of organizations? You know, I'll be honest, at Reclamier, our position from a sales perspective has been next. You're not a good fit. It's a waste of our resources, our precious time as sales and marketing folks to try to sell you something that there is no perceived need and there is minimal perceived risk.
Yeah.
How do you guys define that at HALOCK?
Okay, so let me separate those that should follow DoCRA versus those that might be clients of ours, right? So if you need to do a risk assessment, do it based on DoCRA. There's 3 tiers. It's all free downloads. But if you're looking for someone to, for us to help with that for a risk assessment, you're probably a 1,000 person to 10,000 person organization. Okay. And you probably have multiple security requirements. And you probably want people, process, and technology involved in that. And you want a third party to basically make sure we're attesting to the fact that it was performed correctly like that. So to me, that's the kind of initial criteria, but that's just a baseline risk assessment. We have other clients that go on to do what we call risk management programs or risk management programs plus governance, which is always fun. So they're looking for more than just risk management. They're looking for governance capabilities to help present to the board so that the board can make informed decisions. So we call those RMP plus Gs, risk management programs plus governance. And that's a different sort of client. They're not always, but they're publicly traded or have a high pressure to demonstrate governance. And there's no room for any interpretation of their program, that they can lift their head high. And these are organizations that are big enough where they always have incidents, right? So they know they're going to be faced with constant scrutiny about how they're managing their programs.
And they also have the SEC on top of that. Yeah,
that's right. Whether it's because they're publicly traded or maybe some other regulation, I will tell you, hospitals and healthcare struggle because of the financial aspects. They've struggled. Now, they're doubling down on AI because they think that AI is going to be the answer to their financial issues, that they can automate a lot of things. But firsthand experience I'm seeing is that they are just diving in with adoption without a lot of care for the security outcomes because they want to see the return on the investment for AI. And so they have not yet conceived putting a lot of governance around the implementation of AI. And DoCRA is an easy fit for all those considerations, like any risk analysis. Should we do this? How do we secure it properly? It's all the same.
So Terry, when you are working in these organizations that are 1,000 to 10,000 employees, what group, team, or position are you typically working with in that organization to perform the risk assessment?
I would say our most prominent sponsor is the CISO, right? But it might be a risk and compliance officer, and certainly we've been brought in. There's a couple big publicly traded ones where their outside counsel is leading the charge, and we are directed by them because because it's duty of care risk, and this whole legal bar. They want to make sure that it's all also legally protected. So
it's fair to say that in most cases, you're talking about an enterprise level account.
I think that's the kind of client that sees the value in a duty of care base, because they have legal concerns, they have negligence concerns, they have big class action lawsuits that might come against them that are big dollars, and so it's worth it.
But in order for the organization to improve its overall posture, you would agree that performing a risk assessment under duty of care is something that we should, as practitioners, encourage all clients to move toward at some point in time.
Everyone. If you need to do a risk assessment, it should be DoCRA based.
Okay. So with that said, so for practitioners that are out in the space today, what can we be doing to help get those organizations that are not yet prepared, either because of finance, resource, what have you? How do we get them to start to pay attention through education and awareness, et cetera, so that maybe it doesn't happen in 27, but they can begin the budgeting conversation in 28 and it finally becomes the initiative in 29, and they pull the trigger and they actually do a DoCRA based risk assessment. What do we do
as professionals or as the organization itself?
as
As
HALOCK and Reclamere? What more can we be doing? Because I think you would probably agree there's a whole lot more people in the true SMB space than there are enterprise accounts that need this kind of number one. They need to be aware of it, because I can just tell you anecdotally, when I've had conversations with people and have tried to struggle, and Angie laughs at me, but when I've tried to struggle through duty of care, look at me like I'm from another planet. Like it does not register with them at all. Like this is like, I don't even know what you're talking about, Joe. And I'm talking about risk managers.
Unfortunately, it does take some level of knowledge to try to get through this. So if they're small enough, I just point them to CIS RAM 2.2 and say, go to tier 1, download it, read it. There's the tool. It's asking you questions. You just fill it out. Now, if they want a prompted version, if you want to be a good guy, you can do a 3-4 hour prompted version to kind of chaperone them through answering that. And for the smaller organization, you can do that. If they're kind of a little bit above that, they're above 50 users. Now they're between that 50 and 500 user space where it's kind of no man's land, where they need the help. They're big enough. They should be doing it. You could offer up also a guided tour on the whole thing. So you're going to train them on what this is. Here's how you fill out your initial, risk. And here's the initial risk treatment. Go finish the rest, and I'll audit it, and I'll answer questions along the way. So, I don't want to put dollars and cents necessarily to it, but you're talking about a couple hours just to introduce them to it versus the middle one, which might be you introduce them and then you chaperone them through, and then you audit the final product to make sure it's okay. But you're not doing it for them. You're essentially teaching them to fish and auditing them and answering questions along the way. To me, that's a good one.
If you haven't done it already, you just outlined a really great joint webinar between HALOCK and Reclamere.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
We can do it.
Here's the reality. People are looking for a resource. I'm only going to speak from my experience of, we're only 25 years old. We're not as old as you are, as 30, because you are, now you've admitted to be.
You don't have as much gray hair as I do.
No, but you are better looking. I must say you are better looking. But people don't want to go to CIS too. People don't want to do that. People want to say, okay, this is what you need to do. By the way, let's share screens. Let's do whatever. Here are the 5 points. Here are the 6 things you have to do. I really think that there's value in, not only making them aware, but walking them through a tutorial. Angie laughs at me all the time and makes fun of me and hurts my feelings because she tells me that I skim, which I do. I really like Cliff Notes. That's how I got through college. And I'm okay with that. But I think people just want to be, they want somebody to facilitate for them. They want to have that kind of.
Yeah. So that's a facilitated self-risk assessment, right? They're going to do it themselves, but it's going to be facilitated with a knowledge of someone that knows how to perform it correctly. But you're essentially teaching them how to do it.
Yep.
Because they don't want to spend 50 to 100 grand on it. They want to spend a fraction of that. And that's the best way to get through it.
I think the other thing, Joe, is we have to meet people at the definition that they're familiar and comfortable with. So, DoCRA in a lot of ways is a component of a business impact analysis. Business impact, the risk of litigation is always a risk that organizations should be thinking about and should be then quantifying risk around that. Well, one of the types of litigation is that you're going to end up on the wrong end of a security incident where you're getting sued. So what are the steps to minimize that specific business impact? You apply duty of care. And I think that's probably an area where for our client base, we can begin to introduce those conversations, because too often, clients call us and they want, hey, I need an incident response plan because we're applying for cyber liability coverage and we can't check that box until we have one. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, your entire escalation matrix has so much to do with the business impact analysis. But we want to jump right into the, okay, here's what we do when it happens, and all of those steps before doing that formal work of what is the organizational mission? What is the harm that comes when your organization cannot fulfill its mission? For instance, there are clients where we've done business impact analysis and found that if their services were not available, the suicide risk in their community goes up because their services aren't available. And so I would think that anything that has the potential to impact the business to the point that you cannot deliver services, that's risk of human life. Mm-hmm. Your duty of care on that specific type of risk and how you're going to treat it is going to be very different than those other risks where the impact is potentially reputational. Now, reputational in a publicly traded company, that impacts stock price, valuations, M&A activity. Okay, that can be classified as catastrophic risk. But if you're the only not-for-profit in a community that offers a service and that service not being available increases the likelihood of suicide within your community for a certain period of time, mm-hmm. then that, I would argue that your duty of care is as great or greater than that publicly traded company that's worried about reputational risk that could involve mm-hmm. massive amounts of money in liability. And those are the conversations that you have to have with clients. It has to start with the organizational mission and what happens if you can't fulfill that mission to all of the stakeholders, inside and outside.
Angie, you bring up a really good point. The mission does matter. And here, I'll give you an exact example. I was facilitating a healthcare roundtable recently, and one of the healthcare professionals said, "Hey, we like this security stuff, but we really have an issue with this one guy. He's a researcher, running around the world, and we just cannot lock down his laptop correctly."
Oh, they're the worst.
And they go, what do we do about those situations? How do we balance this? Because we don't want to impact what he's doing. I go, well, what is he doing? He's like, well, he's curing cancer. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly the mission, the what he's doing has such a global impact potentially that locking him down and delaying his ability to perform getting that done doesn't seem correct. So it's not to say we have loose security controls, but we're probably not going to lock him down like we're our billing system. Okay.
Right.
With medical codes on it. So it's just different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I really think that, starting the conversation back at organizational mission. The other one that I've been putting greater emphasis on with our own staff when they're working with clients is how do you generate revenue? And then breaking that revenue down, taking it from annual revenue to monthly revenue to daily revenue to hourly revenue, and what is the amount of downtime that's acceptable? And I think that also has an impact in clients starting to think about this risk, and that would seem to also fit right in with duty of care when we are talking about the cost, the monetary cost of downtime itself.
I have a real simple question that meets this DoCRA bar. When you think about impacts, you think about all potential claimants that you could injure, people that want to come after you because they were injured. That could be a derivative shareholder lawsuit. We've seen those. It could be employee lawsuit because we've seen that, in Pennsylvania, right? And it could be clients, it could be partners, it could be the general public, right? So we've seen, organizations get sued just because they have the potential of having a breach because they weren't properly securing it for the breach that has not yet come. So if you think about all the potential claimants and bring the risk down to an acceptable level, and this is where I've seen serious diversions on people not going right. They think about what the acceptable impact is only to them. I literally had a financial institution, very large, say, we could accept 3 $100 million impacts in a year, so we don't need to remediate any of this stuff. I go, well, acceptable to you. What about all the people that are going to be injured? Like, well, what do we care about that? That is the line right there. The risk has to be also acceptable to all those potentially impacted. And you have to bring the risk down to an acceptable level to them if you want to meet the bar of duty of care. That's it. And that's where all the risk methods have kind of gone sideways up to this point.
Well, how do you put a price or a quantifiable value on something that causes irreparable harm? You know, one of the things I hear people say often anymore is there's almost privacy burnout.
Yeah.
Well, all my data is already out there anyway. What do I care if flock cameras are surveilling me and uploading data to Palantir? What do I care? All my stuff's already out there. It's been breached everywhere. What do I care?
Yeah.
How do you balance that with the fact that to another person, that information is incredibly valuable to them? How do you work through the calculus of those types of claimants or victims, if you will?
Well, I mean, the social media companies have already gone through that gauntlet and they're paying the price on it. So those decisions have come down that they are misusing that data on a privacy perspective. And, you know, of course they want to, try to relitigate those and open them back up. But it comes down, instead of getting the quantitative, I think everyone gets wrapped up in the quantitative, and quantitative is very difficult to say, this is the dollar amount of impact on privacy or life, et cetera. And we'll implement. Ford lost on that one, right? They didn't Ford Pinto case from the 70s. They lost out on the whole balance test on the value of a life and all that, when they should have just had a better car that wasn't crashed in a burning inferno. So you got to take a look at what's the impact, and then what can I do reduce the likelihood or the impact down to an acceptable level. And if this is going to cost to do that way up here versus the weighted impact, then it's not reasonable. So what can I do reasonably to bring down that impact? And if the answer is I can't, then you need to consider maybe that offering, that business unit, that service, unless it has such an extreme mission like solving cancer, then maybe it's something that the organization shouldn't be doing because it's just too risky. Okay. Or maybe next year or the year after, technology will catch up and be able to more effectively and efficiently secure that risk down to an acceptable level. Those are the kind of the things that have to be weighed out. There's no entity that expects, once you understand your risk today, that you need to instantaneously and simultaneously reduce all risk down to an acceptable level to all parties. No one expects that. So there's typically an 8-quarter program to remediate down to an acceptable level. And we'll call the third year kind of a gray zone. But we know by year 4, you're probably in trouble with legal entities and others if you go to year 4 on kicking the can down the road on remediation.
Yeah, and this really proves the point I've been trying to make for 2 decades now, especially with IT practitioners, the difference between a gap assessment and a true security risk analysis is the difference between checkers and chess. It's the difference between arithmetic and calculus. It's the difference between statics and dynamics. Yeah. It is so much more complex when you're doing true risk analysis work versus a yes/no checklist of a gap assessment. And for too long, those two things have been commingled and improperly defined. And it's really done a disservice to both because they both have a place in the organization. But there are definite use cases where a risk assessment or a gap assessment is absolutely not even remotely enough for these types of complex situations.
I mean, you're talking about the difference between compliance and risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So compliance and security, rather. The part that annoys me most probably is when there's and this is the fault of bigger, consulting firms. So we'll just say that they're at the root of this. It's easy for them to perform maturity score assessments as a part of a gap assessment or a controls assessment on a scale from 1 to 5. What's your maturity? And then rate that overall category and then the overall score. And I literally have very large companies, CISO, saying, well, we're at a 2.6 or 2.8. And I told the board we get to a 3.1, and I go, who cares? Well, that's where we were told that's where our peers are. Well, who cares? Your peers are being breached. Try to say a defense that we were at a 3.1 maturity, the same as our peers, and that should be good. No regulator in the world will say, oh, that's great. Congratulations, you met your duty of care. You have lower liability. Not a soul will ever say that. So the fact that this has been propagated, this whole where are my peers at? What's their maturity score? I need to get my maturity score up. You want to know the maturity of your controls. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't go the step in understanding what the impacts are and the probability of that impact happening, there's no way you can actually have a prioritized list of remediation efforts to get down to an acceptable level of risk. You're just blind. You're just blindly applying money to controls to bring up an overall average when you could have probably applied it to the one thing that was really super risky and impactful that you could have actually applied it towards. Instead, you watered it down.
And that's the other part where when we talk to IT practitioners that get wrapped up around the technical controls are not risk management. Technical risk management starts with, yes, I know you have MFA, but risk management starts with the fact that MFA is going to fail in some way, shape, or form. And what is the impact of when that happens? And which systems is it least likely to happen on, and which is it most likely to happen on?
Yeah.
That's where risk analysis begins, not do you have MFA? Yes, no.
Yeah, well, insurance hasn't done us any favors with that either. And insurance is a big driver. I mean, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. When they said you need MFA, the whole world got MFA within a year. I mean, that's what happened, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And then they started asking for endpoint detection and response. Everyone followed suit with that. But yeah, the true risk analysis, pushing back. And I've seen clients that properly perform duty of care risk analysis when they have a bigger entity or a regulator or a big client say, we need you to put this control in place. They do the risk analysis and say, you know what? We don't think so because that's burdensome or it's going to break a law. And let me show you our risk analysis. Every single time they've won that argument because it is the reasonable balance test. And by the way, the HIPAA security rule, a little unknown fact is that the reason why risk assessments are in risk management are the number one, number two controls within the HIPAA security rule is because of Executive Order 12866 that Bill Clinton signed in 1992, requiring a cost-benefit analysis in all federal regulations. So the Office of Management and Budget interpreted that executive order as requiring a risk assessment. And the HIPAA security rule was one of those that had it inserted in there.
Look at you, a little bit of history. Huh.
Okay. Since we're talking about healthcare, so for all the folks there that have to follow the HIPAA security rule, that's why you have to perform risk assessments.
So Terry, is there anything else that you just want to review or share today before we wrap up? Because we're rolling into about almost 45 minutes of taking up your very precious time, my friend.
We've said it almost all.
Okay.
In 45 minutes, that's a lot. But you ask me questions, and maybe I can answer.
Okay. So where someone comes to you and they are truly in an SMB space, they are they're in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
They have I'll give you the demographics of a client. They're in healthcare. They have 582 employees.
Okay.
They have a director of information services. They have an InfoSec manager. They have a risk group of 2 employees. Where do they get started? How do they get started? What kind of questions should they be asking? Whoa, Angie brought a dog. Look at that. She has a puppy at work. Sorry.
Well, step one.
Sorry.
Step one, have they performed any sort of diagnostic that would, follow the HIPAA security rule, which says you need to perform a risk assessment? If they haven't done that, I would start there because they need to prioritize the risk and a risk treatment plan. Just because you have a risk register and a risk treatment plan, typically risk treatment plans are pretty high level.
Okay.
Where I see a lot of organizations like that get stuck is, how do I take this and translate it into a roadmap that has very, very specific solutions, steps, configurations, dependencies, et cetera, into a Gantt chart and project plan that they can then manage off of. Because the challenge right there is, great, I have a risk register, I have a risk treatment plan, but I'm dependent on all these other people to give me input to develop that roadmap. And so I need their time and their insights. And will this technology work in our environment? Is it compatible with this and that? And that roadmap development, we found, can take about 50% of whatever the risk assessment, say, budget or time was. Take that, and half of that is what you're going to need to have a proper roadmap developed.
Okay.
And that's where I think people miss. They manage off the risk treatment plan, and they're not getting the real roadmap that they can get buy-in on the projects. They're not getting buy-in from the organization, so it gets stalled out and it gets tossed on the side, quite honestly.
Okay. Angie, any last minute questions?
No, I've absolutely loved having Terry on as our guest. I could talk about this stuff for hours.
I know.
Fun.
Well,
We can talk about our favorite song next time.
Oh, if you sing, only if you sing. Open mic.
No, I won't do it.
Oh my.
But
so Terry, number one,
yes,
thank you. Number two, you are a superstar, and number three, my ask is, think about being a guest of ours at our October National Cybersecurity Awareness 2-day event in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. Okay.
As soon as I have the location and the dates lined up, I will send those over to you. And it would be great to have you in Pennsylvania.
Well, I lived in Greensburg for a stint, so that here's just Harrisburg, right?
Harrisburg,
just a little to the east, right?
A little bit of a jaunt. That's all. And we even have like an international airport, HIA.
Oh yeah,
direct flights.
Yeah,
wow.
Direct flights Chicago to Harrisburg. There's plenty of those.
No excuses.
Right.
No excuses.
Sounds good. I will seriously consider it.
Thank you. I'm going to drop you guys back into a green room. And again, Terry, thanks so much. Thanks, Angie.
My pleasure.
Terry.
Cheers.